Peter Pan is a classic novel loaded with dark themes and suspicious symbolism. And that's exactly what makes this book so fascinating. It's these darker aspects and readings that we're going to be discussing today that gives this book such a depth of emotion and resonance that honestly otherwise it wouldn't have. It would just be a kid's story. But this is not a kid's story. It tells the story of Peter Pan being stuck in an endless cycle of superficial adventure, which he forgets almost instantly because he has the memory of a goldfish. It tells a story of loneliness as everyone he meets leaves him over and over to do the one thing he can't bring himself to do: grow up. It's a very creepy and weird and dark book. So let's do a very top level reading of Peter Pan, the most accessible theme, the first that springs to mind when you think of Peter Pan, and that is the fear of growing up. You know, loss of innocence. All children except one grow up. These are the very first words of Barrie's novel. The theme is so central that it can be seen in the name, okay? Peter Pan. It's no accident that his name is Pan. The etymology of the word Pan, the Greek root, roughly translates to God of everything. That's why you have pantheism, pansexuality, pancreas? And that's what Peter wants to remain. He wants to remain everything. This pure potential. Because there is a sacrificial element in maturation. You have to sacrifice the pluripotentiality of childhood for the actuality of a frame of being something, of adulthood. When you're a child, you're just pure potential, right? But it's really low resolution. You can be anything, but you are nothing. Like, no offense to all the kids out there, but you're nothing. And then you have to actually choose to be something. And the only adult that Peter Pan has as like a role model, for want of a better word, is his arch nemesis, Captain Hook, this evil tyrant of a man who is constantly being chased by this crocodile that has an audibly ticking clock inside of its stomach. It's eaten his hand or his arm, and it's on a mission to get the rest of him. This is a very clear symbol of what it means to be aging. Always being tormented and chased by time. It's had a taste of you, and it won't stop until it devours you, ultimately leading to death. So, you know, you're sacrificial whether you want to be or not. Carl Jung talked about the proper path of development in the last half of your life, and that is to rediscover that child that you left behind when you chose to be something, when you sacrificed all that potential for actuality. Speaking of Jung, I'd be really interested to hear what he has to say about the scene where Peter Pan is trying to glue his shadow back on with soap. You know, like that's very clearly, you know, shadow work. Okay, so let's talk about dark theory number 1, and that is that Wendy was being sexually abused by her father, Mr. Darling. What I'm about to say might sound completely crazy, but I'm gonna back it up, okay? Wendy and Peter Pan are the same person. So, okay, hear me out. Wendy, in these times, the name Wendy was not a girl's name at all. It was purely, exclusively a boy's name. It only became popularized as a girl's name after the success of the novel, and before that, there was a play. And so, not only are Peter Pan and Wendy running from growing up, but they're running from her father, Mr. Darling, who is sexually abusive. When Peter Pan flies in through Wendy's window that fateful night they first meet, Wendy says, or the narrator says that Wendy thinks, she notes to herself that he is just her size. She meant that he was her size in both mind and body. She doesn't know how she knew it, she just knew it. And this is because Wendy is Peter, and Peter is Wendy. They are the same person. Well, they're a split self. And what's even more interesting is that even in their like split selves, they still have fragmented parts of themselves. For instance, you know, Peter Pan has Tinkerbell, who is kind of like this protector. And anytime anyone, you know, comes close to sexualizing Peter Pan or making advances on him, you know, Tinkerbell is always there. And she kind of wards all that off. And then you've got Peter Pan's shadow, which is always trying to escape and break away from him. Wendy is around 12 or 13 in this book when the novel begins. And so she's just on the cusp of, you know, the journey towards womanhood when she is confronted with Peter, who is her childhood. Peter is actually a representation of childhood for all the women in the play, or the book. Both. Because Mrs. Darling notes that she has vague memories of Peter Pan from when she was young. And then Peter Pan comes back later in the book when Wendy has her descendants. You know, she has a daughter, and he comes to that daughter when she's a girl and to her daughter's daughter. And it's just like this never-ending cycle. And another clue is that J.M. Barrie for the play, he instructed that anyone who played Peter Pan must be a female. So Wendy has conjured up Peter Pan in her mind, in her Neverland, as this personification of her youth, her fighting spirit. And she needs him now more than ever because she is in the middle of a battle. Who is this battle with? Her father, Mr. Darling. And who is Peter Pan fighting? Captain Hook. Once again, to draw clues from J.M. Barrie's stage instructions, he stated that the same actor must play Captain Hook and Mr. Darling. Neverland is really Wendy's psyche. In like fairy tales and myths, there's this concept where if children need to fight a battle, they go to this mystical land to do it. And it's there that they fight this battle or they deal with this trauma. You know, in other words, you have to travel from the conscious mind to the subconscious mind. You know, we see this in Narnia and in Alice in Wonderland. In the novel, there are times when Peter and Wendy contradict themselves, but in the end, they come together. Like when they're fighting Captain Hook, when they're having that battle scene, they both fall down and faint at the exact same time. So let's talk about the similarities between Captain Hook and Mr. Darling. First of all, I gotta note that also J.M. Barrie instructed for the play that whoever plays Captain Hook also must play Mr. Darling. Both are very proper and obsessed with manners and, performance. And Mr. Darling is described as a tornado, and the book says he was never more sinister than when he was polite. It's an odd thing to say, isn't it? When does Hook go to attack Peter? It's when Peter is in bed, asleep. And when does Peter come to rescue Wendy? It's when it's at nighttime, just before she's going to bed, when she is vulnerable and unsafe. Peter Pan, when he's trying to convince her to come away with him, he says, "Forget them, Wendy, forget them all. Come with me and you'll never have to worry about grown-up things again." And why is it that Captain Hook has had his arm cut off by Peter? You know, why that part of him specifically? You know, because it symbolizes him trying to grab at Peter. Peter Pan is her way of distancing herself from these attacks from her father. I mentioned earlier Peter's memory. He has a memory of a goldfish. And, you know, he takes on all of these memories and all of these traumas because he can forget. But still, he's not without trauma. He has these terrible nightmares and he cries and he doesn't know why. And it's Wendy who then has to comfort him in his sleep, and she holds him while he goes through these crying attacks and nightmares. He also says he hates all mothers. Why does he hate mothers? Is it because he really hates Mrs. Darling, Wendy's mother, for not being able to protect her from her father? Okay, so let's talk about dark theory number 2. And that is that Peter Pan is a psychopathic killer. So this isn't really theory, it's pretty much fact. He kidnaps and lures kids, and he takes them away, and when they get too old, or what he deems too old, he just straight up murders them. The island vary, of course, in numbers, according as they get killed and so on. And when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. He also commits mass murder anytime he feels like it. As soon as he got inside his tree, he breathed intentionally quick, short breaths, at the rate of about 5 to a second. He did this because there is a saying in Neverland that every time you breathe, a grown-up dies. And Peter was killing them off vindictively as fast as possible. So yeah, I think the verdict is in. That Peter Pan, the fun-loving boy from your childhood, is in fact a psychopathic killer.